Thank you for joining me today as we discuss a topic that is on top of mind for virtually every business owner: supply chain disruption. Businesses and consumers are feeling the effects of the disrupted supply chains locally and globally, honestly. So to help me explore this topic today is Scott Schein, the Director of National Network and Supply Chain Programs at GENDEGE Alliance. This is a Virginia-based manufacturing and economic development organization. Among the many services offered by GENEDGE is supply chain optimization. They work with manufacturing, industrial, and engineering firms across the Commonwealth as part of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership National Network, helping organizations meet the challenges they face on a daily basis. Welcome, Scott. I know you're very busy, so I really appreciate your taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, Penny. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, Scott, let's start off by, if you could, tell our audience briefly about GENEDGE and your work here in Virginia.
Yeah, sure. GENEDGE is one of the best publicly available resources to small and mid-sized manufacturers and broadly businesses across the Commonwealth of Virginia. We bring a breadth of resources in, as you mentioned, supply chain, but also operations improvement, sales, marketing, finance, technology. And so we're one of the few resources out there really devoted to small and mid-sized businesses. As a former owner-operator of a manufacturing company here in Virginia, I could tell you those resources are few and far between. And so being a publicly available resource is something that can really enable small and mid-sized businesses to grow here in Virginia. And we also don't have the, as much of the, we're a nonprofit. So we don't have the motive of trying to extract extra hours. We really are, we get measured on the success of the businesses we serve. So it's a great resource here in Virginia.
Great, good to know. And I hope the word spreads. That's a great resource. So Scott, many of our business owners or many of our listeners are small business owners, and the disruptions to the supply chains, of course, have impacted them heavily. And it's something that we've been hearing about and businesses have been struggling with for quite some time. Can you help us to understand what really is causing this havoc?
Yeah, there are several factors, but I like to boil it down simply into supply and demand, right? And so the pandemic really crushed both supply and demand over the last couple of years, and I think everyone's aware of that. The demand has come back pretty strong globally as we've kind of slowly emerged from the pandemic. The big challenge has been for businesses to meet that demand. There's never been such a cycle in recent history, whether it's manufacturing or business globally. We haven't seen anything like that. And so this type of ramp up in demand we haven't seen. And then that's compounded by the fact we've had what we're calling broadly the Great Resignation. So the workforce has been slow to return. And so when that workforce is slow to return, meeting that demand is an increased challenge. And that impacts everything from logistics to manufacturing to service businesses. And so the demand's there, but the supply, both on the workforce and material side, is not. It's slowly getting there, but it's still not where it needs to be to meet the demand. And that spike in demand we haven't seen. So over time, it's usually kind of what I'll call the steady Eddie, supply and demand curve, where the demand's pretty predictable and the supply's there. And the pandemic pretty much blew that up over the last couple of years.
Yeah, definitely unprecedented times from many aspects.
For everybody, yep.
Yeah. So for many of those listening, as I said, there are small business owners who are struggling to get even some of the very basic supplies that they need to keep their businesses going, whether it's supplies that a restaurant needs, napkins and straws, or it's solder at a manufacturer. And because these businesses are often operating on a shoestring budget, that they don't have the financial resources of the bigger organizations and bigger companies. So does this really put them at a huge disadvantage when it comes to competing for the limited supplies that are available?
Well, I'll say this, that again, as a former owner operator, and historically, we haven't had to spend as much time on purchasing and supply chain strategy more broadly. I think a lot of owner operators really operate in a purchasing space, very transactional. This is what I need. This is what I buy. I know my suppliers. They know me. I cut my order and go. That world's gone. That
Right.
world is gone. And so now owner operators and execs for mid-sized firms now need to spend more time on supply chain strategy, supply chain management, whereas before it was transactional purchasing. And so that's kind of how I separate purchasing and supply chain. So what does that mean? The suppliers you have relied on in the past are not as reliable as they used to be, or their pricing isn't as competitive as it used to be. The materials aren't as available as it used to be. So guess what? Now you need to broaden your supply base. And so you need to reach out to suppliers and vendors that you don't know. They don't know you. You're having to qualify them and evaluate them. As a former small business owner, I like to do that with other small businesses because they will value your business differently than a large conglomerate will. And the quantities that you're bringing will be valued, the orders that you're bringing will be valued. And so you're having to spend significant time really evaluating new suppliers. And by the way, those suppliers may not be local. They may be in other states. They may be in other parts of the country. And so I would say that the small business owners will need to spend more time on supply chain and have a plan for supply chain. They may need to also have a demand plan or a forecast in order to develop what I'll call more leverage in their interactions with suppliers. So instead of just the one-off order, it may be, well, here's what I expect to order over the next 12 months. That's a more intriguing discussion with a new supplier than I just want to order these 5 widgets today.
Sure.
And so if you can, and that, by the way, that is not something all business owners or owner operators are used to doing. Again, that's a resource that GenEdge can provide. And it doesn't need to be that complicated. It doesn't need to be a 1,000-line spreadsheet, but it's something that will help engage new suppliers, both small and large, with more quantity, which will get them more interested in doing business with you, and also developing an inventory management plan. So if there's a shortage, then you can stock certain part numbers and materials and feel confident that you're going to use them and turn them over fairly quickly, so you're not holding up that cash.
That makes complete sense. And I think you're right that a lot of small business owners, when they hear supply chain management and optimization, it seems like, oh, that's too big, that's too complicated.
That's what Boeing does.
Yes, exactly. But it makes perfect sense. This is a changed world that we're all operating in. So is there anything else that a small business owner can do to prepare for a potential supply shortage?
Well, I'll go back to the forecasting. So if you're able to develop a credible forecast, what does that mean? And so that means that you have an understanding of what the demand will be from your customer base over, let's say, the next 12 months. And sometimes you can look at historical, sometimes you look at your contracts. Every business is different. Then you have different avenues to address. So you can do it through a stocking plan, a safety stock plan. So if there are critical materials or part numbers that drive your business, and that if you did not have access to them would shut you down or cause great disruption, that should be part of your inventory management plan. Now, the debate that you get into sometimes is, well, I don't have the cash for that. I can't lock up cash for that period of time. If you have a good plan, that will enable you to engage. Hopefully you have banking relationships. If you don't, I really encourage every owner operator to do that, to engage them in I need a credit line that will directly address this inventory management plan. and here's my plan. And if you're able to credibly present that to your banker, they should be able to work with you on a credit line that will enable your liquidity. It's not your cash flow necessarily, but the liquidity that will enable you to stock inventory and reduce the risk around some of these more critical part numbers and materials.
Yeah, good advice, good planning. So when the inevitable happens and a small business owner operator can't get a hold of some key supplies that they need, whatever that is, are there specific action steps that they should take at that point?
Yeah, I mean, if you are a business owner and you are searching for materials that you can't find, my question to you will be, is that because you are searching for those materials with your current vendors and your current suppliers? I think that the answer is usually yes. And I was guilty of this too. So I'm not throwing stones here, but over time, you tend to rely on this kind of base of suppliers and vendors that have treated you well, they've served you well over time. And so when I hear I can't find this material, it's usually, have you looked beyond your current supply base?
Right.
Have you looked beyond your current locality? We always love to have materials locally. That's just easy. But in my previous life, a lot of our vendors were local. A lot of them had worked with us for decades. They were very reliable. The pricing was competitive. That world has changed quite a bit. And so when I hear I can't find it, or you've been using online resources, that's another one. I've just pressed the button.
Yeah.
And it just showed up. Well, what I'd say is that you need to kind of broaden your supply base in order to manage that risk. And whether it's looking out of your region, looking out of your segment of suppliers that you're currently dealing with, and qualifying them and looking for alternatives. Again, that's more time.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it. I don't want to dismiss that. It is a time to really qualify new vendors, how they do business, how they, you may be multiple vendors. And so it becomes more part of the day-to-day job of owner operators, where it really wasn't prior to the last couple of years. And then getting creative about, especially if you're in the kind of the engineering or manufacturing world, or there are alternative materials, not just alternative suppliers, but are there alternative materials that you can use for certain applications? So we work with clients that are actually evaluating that. So, you know what? We've done everything you're saying, Scott, but it's not enough. We have to look at different designs. We have to look at different materials for those designs so we can better manage our risks down the road.
Interesting. Yeah. It's a lot of thinking outside the box that's required, right?
Yep.
And I would offer too that it's important to make sure that your consumer, your client base is, as a business owner, you need to be honest and upfront with them and let them know what's going on, and keeping them in the dark is not an ideal.
You hit on a critical point, is the communication with consumers. So that point around alternative materials, that on paper, that's wonderful, but for certain customers that may not work, or you need to open that discussion around material A, B, C. I'm thinking about A, how would it impact your world? And so having that conversation and that open communication with customers, especially in this environment, I think is absolutely key. I think that's a great point.
Good. So now for the $1 million question, Scott, what is the best advice that you can give to a small business owner when it comes to supply chain?
I may mention it. I mean, being flexible, being nimble, being open to spending more time and your own resources on developing a supply chain plan. And again, I think you hit on it earlier, Penny. It's not exclusive to the likes of the Boeings and the Microsofts of the world. It applies to small and mid-sized businesses too. Does it look different? Yeah, I used to work for those guys, and those would be voluminous PowerPoint presentations, and they were beautiful and they were wonderful. That's not what we're talking about here. This is a simple. It could be on a few bullet points on a piece of paper. It doesn't need to be that complicated, but laying out the plan on how you're going to address these risks that we've talked about, shortages, certain part numbers, certain materials, whether I don't have the supply, the pricing's not competitive anymore, whatever that is, having a plan around that. I really think putting together a demand forecast will help, and it'll help with financing, it'll help with your customers, it'll help with vendors having visibility to that. And no forecast is right. I get that. So please don't spend months and years on putting together a forecast, but have a justification for it, have some logic to it. And again, that's something we work with folks quite a bit on. So I'd say have a plan, be nimble, be flexible, look at alternative suppliers and materials, and put together a forecast.
All right, that makes sense. So for the small business owners, the mom and pops and the very small businesses, what resources are available to them if they can't afford the services of a GenEdge or a similar firm?
Yeah, I think most of them can afford GenEdge as a publicly available resource, but for the really small mom and pop firms, there's lots of, I mentioned the forecasting and the planning. There's substantial online resources out there on how, what does a good demand plan look like? What does a forecast look like? You can do a lot of that investigation on your own and get that training online. We also are developing a small business program here at GenEdge to address a lot of this, because as a small owner operator myself, you don't have time for week-long classes and trainings and the kind of, I'll call it the more corporate type of learning environment. You want to learn as you go. Yeah, you just don't have that. And so we are working on resources, not just online resources, but also consulting resources that are just short. We talk about the demand plan. So there will probably be an offering tied to, here's 3 or 4 hours. It doesn't need to be a week. Here's 3 or 4 hours on the basics of putting together a good demand plan or forecast. This is what it looks like. So we're working on those types of resources as well, because after what's gone on the last couple of years, there's clearly a need.
Right, absolutely there is. Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's good news and something we'll definitely be watching for. I'm afraid, Scott, our time is up. This has been very helpful and enlightening, so we appreciate sharing your industry knowledge with us. And I know the advice you're offering will be welcomed by many of the business owners here in Virginia. I want to thank everyone for watching. At the end of this video, we're going to, I'll have some valuable contact information for you that you'll want to take a note of. And we wish all of you business owners and leaders who are watching today the very best in your endeavors to keep the consumers here in Southern Virginia serviced and well supplied. Please be sure to check out our other videos, our video podcast, and other resources that are available on the resource page of the Twin County Chamber of Commerce website under services. And those are brought to you by the Blue Ridge Crossroads Small Business Development Center and the Twin County Chamber. I'm Penny Lovecraft of Chappell Business Strategies. Until next time. Thank you, Scott.